so Chicana feminism. I'll do a little introduction and then we'll go over some art pieces that I've created. And yeah, this will be a great episode. All right, so first off, before we start anything, what is a Chicana? So a Chicana is typically a Mexican-American woman. There have been Latina women who have a kind of adopted that Chicana term. It started gaining usage during the Chicano movement of the 60s and 70s, and the Chicano movement itself took a lot of cues from the Black Panther Party and other racial liberation movements. So one of the big things about the Chicano movement was this idea of Aztlán, so a homeland for Mexican Americans in the American Southwest. There was the idea that Mexican Americans had always been here, and then we weren't really, immigrants in this land. Let's see. Chicana started to separate themselves from the typical ideal of what a Mexican American woman should be. So during the Chicano movement, and even today, there was a lot of back and forth between what the woman's role should be in the movement, in the protests, and in the activism stage. It was usually kind of subservient, cooking, cleaning. Some people have kind of called it like barefoot in the kitchen, making dinner, right? Like that was kind of what the Chicana was supposed to do. While Chicanos fought for racial liberation, so making sure that they were represented in school, that they had civil rights. Chicanos also had to contend with sexism from their fathers, brothers, and lovers. So it was kind of from both sides. You have on one side the racial aspect of it, and on the other side, the sexist aspect of it, right? So Chicanos were kind of feeling like they had to choose between either fighting for racial liberation or fighting for female liberation. Before we continue, the Chicana movement itself had a lot of different issues with it. So first of all, it was anti-Indigenous. So the idea of Aztlán, right, that there was this homeland, kind of stemmed from the Aztecs, right? And so, which are called, we call it Aztec, but it's really the Mexica people of Mexico. Sorry, my cat's making a fuss. So it was kind of anti-Indigenous, right? There was this idea that like we are all Indigenous, but there are actual like Indigenous people still in Mexico today, and in the United States, and that's a different experience than what the typical Mexican American is. It was also anti-Black, so there was this idea that like you can't be like Black and Mexican, or Indigenous and Mexican. A lot of different like issues involved in that. There was this idea that like Chicanos are just brown, and brown means a mix of Spanish and a mix of Indigenous, and that kind of left out a lot of people from the conversation, which leads us into the other point, homogenization. So just basically like making everyone brown. As we know today, not every Mexican American is brown. You look at me, I'm very light complected, very white. You look at my father, he's very dark, right? And there's a lot of different skin tones, racial makeups of Mexican Americans, so it's not a monolith. There's a lot of sexism in the Chicano movement. So again, what we were talking about with, women, while the men were kind of fighting for like racial liberation, the women were expected to kind of take a back seat. There was a lot of homophobia as well. So the Chicano movement itself kind of didn't view its gay members, its LGBT members as part of the movement, and they kind of wanted them as well to take a back seat. As for Chicanas, like I said earlier, they had, the Chicano movement, and then they had the feminist movement. And so a lot of Chicanas at first were kind of inspired by what was going on with mainstream feminism. But the feminism for Anglo women, right? So typically white American women, was kind of alienating as well. There wasn't really a lot of class analysis or racial analysis. So most of this feminism didn't really think about women who were already working for a long time, right? Usually in the service industries, hospitality industries. And it wasn't really thinking about like what it means to be a woman who is also racialized, right? So for a lot of white women, they hadn't experienced racism before. And so that's why a lot of Chicanas decided to carve out a space for themselves away from Chicanos, right? From that male kind of dominated movement and then away from white women, right? Because that was kind of dominated again by white women and didn't really have their interests in mind. So Chicana doesn't have a lot of use today. It has been critiqued in the way that Chicano has, right? So again, even the Chicana movement had its own problems. The same thing with homophobia, anti-Indigenous sentiment. But there are a few concepts from the movement that are still useful today, which my biggest takeaway from the Chicana movement has been testimonio. So it's sharing our lived experiences and witnessing others do the same. So if you follow the Robstown art page, I actually did a testimonials workshop a couple of weeks ago, and I've used the same kind of idea back in college, and I've even used it in my own work. And so the idea of testimonios, in English, it just means testimony, right? And so it was first theorized in a lot of Chicana writing that the only way for us to start to step away from these gendered expectations is to start communicating with women, to listening to our mothers, our grandmothers, our sisters, our tias, our cousins, and figuring out what we share, what's in common, where we're different, and just letting others know that, you know, I'm there for you, I'm here for you, and I feel your struggle, you know? And so that's kind of why I wanted my mother to be a co-host for this session, for this episode, because I owe a lot to her, and I've learned a lot from her and from our family as well. And I think in order for us to move forward and to kind of continue furthering our liberation and furthering our rights, we have to look backward. We have to look at the past and look at what has worked and what hasn't, and what still needs fixing and what still needs changing. And again, you know, I think another reason why I wanted my mom to be on here with us is because I don't want this episode to be purely academic. I know I've kind of done a lot of definitions and just kind of thrown some history at y'all. But you don't need to be, you don't have to be well-versed or like read theory. You don't have to do any of that to practice feminism or practice Chicana feminism. You just have to have the intent, right? And the willingness to listen to others. Awesome. Mario Zamora says, Brown is beautiful. Let's take a stand. Robson, Texas. God is good. Orale, bro. May God bless you. Thanks. Thank you, Mario. Awesome. And anyone else who's listening, feel free to chime in with any comments. But yeah, so again, it doesn't have to be intellectual. You don't have to have gone to college to want to practice Chicana feminism or practice feminism in general. And so really this next part is going to be more about just talking about our lived experiences and seeing if anyone else has felt this way or if anyone else has gone through this as well. So, okay, that was a lot. So we're going to be looking at artwork as we kind of go through these ideas and these experiences. And all of the artwork is artwork that I've created. It just makes things easier if it's things that I have made, you know, because I know it. So, you know, when we look at this picture, I guess, Mom, if you want to chime in, what do you see? What do you think what does this remind you of?
It reminds me of your grandma, my mom. I've
Ooh.
always said that about this picture. And I remember asking you, is that grandma? And you said, no, I just drew it.
Mm-hmm.
And, but I see it and it just reminds me so much of my mother, your grandmother. And, she almost looks, saintly, like, how can I say, like she's the one who started it all,
Mm-hmm.
I just see that, and I see my mother in that picture.
Mm-hmm. And that's purposeful, right? So it's not exactly Grandma Nena, but it is inspired by her, and it's inspired by Tia Flor as well, Grandma's sister. So,
Mm-hmm.
and I like what you said about the saintly picture or that image, right?
Right.
Um, and I don't know if other people who are at home or watching notice this, but I kind of modeled her after La Virgen, right? The Virgin Mary. Um,
Right.
and I mean, it's not exactly like the Virgin Mary, but she's got the same kind of blue cloak. And the reason for that was specifically because Catholicism is so huge in
Mm-hmm.
Latino circles, in Mexican American circles.
Mm-hmm.
Again, not everyone grew up Catholic. I mean, we weren't Catholic. Grandma Nena was Catholic, but we weren't. Um, but I think, you know, this is kind of really big, right? This icon, this Virgin Mary. And, I have her with her hand on her heart and then her fingers crossed.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you want to speak on that or like what you think that means.
um I don't know, it almost seems like it's it's iconic,
Mm-hmm.
but almost like I promise to always protect you,
Mm-hmm.
like taking an oath, like when you're swearing an oath or something, and it
Mm-hmm.
almost seems like that's what she's doing. She's promising to me, she's promising to always protect me and be there for me no matter what. uh
Yeah.
you know
Yeah. Um, yeah, for sure. Um, and that is what a lot of our mothers do. Like they're there for us no matter what. Um, and so we think of the Virgin Mary as like the ultimate mother. But I
right.
also think sometimes we tend to put that kind of expectation on women and girls, right? Because when we think of the Virgin Mary, we think of her as like self-sacrificing and pure and holy, right?
Mm-hmm.
And while that's okay to an extent, right? Like praising hard work or praising like sacrifice in our mothers and our grandmothers, I think sometimes that goes too far to the other end where we only expect sacrifice from our moms, right? We kind of
Right.
forget that they're people too.
Oh,
Um, yeah, and I know, I mean, I was like that growing up with you. I mean, now that I'm older, I feel like I appreciate you a lot more, but I know for sure there was times when I was growing up where I'm like, oh, you're a mom, like you're supposed to act this way, you're supposed to do this, and you're not supposed to want to hang out with friends or have a drink. Like, but for real, right? Like that's,
yeah,
I mean, and I think there wasn't only me that thought that, but like
yeah. Like, what do you
husbands
do
think
to
that.
have friends? I'm your only friend.
Yeah, that too.
I should be your only friend.
Yeah. But husbands think that, right? Um, Other people, other family members will think that. Like if you're not, 100% mom all of the time,
Right.
you're doing something wrong,
Right.
you know? And which isn't the case, right? Like mothers are people too.
Right.
um,
I had the same perception of your grandma, my
mhm,
mom. You know, I always remember her as self-sacrificing,
mhm,
and I tend to forget that she was a human being too. I felt this exact same way.
mhm,
It's like I'm your child. You should be there for me.
mhm.
My mother wasn't allowed to have a social life.
Yeah.
She wasn't allowed to go out on the weekends. She wasn't allowed to do, and I always said, no, you're my mother, and I always thought, you know, I'm your number one. I'm your girl. I'm your daughter, and I never looked at her as that a person who had feelings. I never saw her cry. I never saw her, have a hard moment, or I never saw her like she was struggling, and I never saw that on her face. Never, never did.
Yeah,
So
and no, it's true. It's true. I mean, I think part of it is that moms feel the need to like hide that part of themselves, right?
mhm.
Because on one level, like the kids don't need to see, especially if they're little. But on the other side, right, there's the expectation from other people, right? And I don't think dads are really held to that same standard. I
You're
think,
right.
yeah, and I mean, we look at, my father, your ex-husband, and then your father, right, Grandpa Ray. The expectation was that if they showed up, like that was good, right? Like that's a good dad. And I
Yeah,
think that
they
happens.
were expected. Yeah, no, you're right. I think they were expected to be the providers, the
Mm-hmm,
breadwinners, and
for sure.
never the nurturers.
Mm-hmm,
Never the nurturers.
mm-hmm,
My father, he wasn't a nurturer. He
mm-hmm,
was not. I didn't get that till later, but I
mm-hmm,
remember as a child, my father wasn't the nurturer. He just wasn't.
mm-hmm,
Yes, he was very good to me and everything, but I just don't remember as me running and crying to him.
mm-hmm,
It was always my mom, my grandma,
mm-hmm.
and
Yeah,
he just wasn't a nurturer.
yeah. And I think, that also harms men too, right? That they can't, or they're not expected to show that vulnerability and that nurturing quality to their children and even to their wives or to their partners. Or it's more like you got to do this, this, and this, and there's no room otherwise. Um,
Right.
so with that being said, right, we've got like this like sacrificial kind of symbolism, but also um this idea that I don't know if you've heard of this before, the Madonna versus the whore kind of complex. I don't know if that's something that you've heard.
No.
It's okay.
No.
It's kind
Yeah.
of the idea that like that's okay, no, it's fine. It's kind of the idea that like either you're good or you're like, excuse my language, or like a slut, right? And
Uh-huh.
so not to get into, because I know there's some kids watching or will be
Yeah,
watching.
your
Uh
little sisters.
yeah. Uh, but there's this idea, right, that if you're not like this holy symbol, right, then you're awful and you're like this like not a good woman, right? That you're like a
Right.
bad woman. Um,
Right.
for things as simple as just, maybe not wanting to get married right away, or maybe not like wanting kids immediately. Um, awesome. So Israel Maldonado Jr. says, I'm loving to my kids. Even when they grow up, I will still be there for them. That's awesome. That's awesome. And, as we move forward, like, again, we're not going to say like all men are like this, or like,
Right. Right.
all,
You're totally right. Not all men are like that, and I could say that my husband, he's a nurturer,
mm-hmm,
and he shows his feelings, he
mm-hmm.
expresses how he feels. He's totally different from my father, totally
Yeah.
different.
And,
And not all men, you're right, not all men are like that.
mhm. But with the caveat that a lot of them are, and it's not, again, part of it is this environment that we're raised in, right? And part of it is those expectations from their fathers, right? And even mothers sometimes put that expectation on the boys and put it on the girls too. Um,
Yeah.
it's more of like a bigger kind of, there's the individuals, right? And what we do on an individual level and how we interact with everyone. But then there's a society level, right? And again, we're speaking strictly from our perspectives, right? Our background. what we dealt with. And again, there's great fathers out there. There's wonderful fathers out there, wonderful men out there too, who are vulnerable, who share their emotions. But I do think that for the most part, they're not allowed to show it, right? Because if you show stuff like
Right.
that, or if you show nurture, even
You're
now,
weak.
it's like if you're not a father, you get called like all sorts of words, right? You get compared to a
Right.
girl, which is interesting, I think, right? Because if you know, get called like a sissy or other words that mean sissy, other vulgar words,
Right.
it's like,
And
you know,
it's funny you should say that they get called a girl, because complete opposite. My grandma, my mother's mom,
mhm.
she was not a nurturer whatsoever. She was a tough woman. I mean, she did not stay at home. She labored. She worked in the fields. She drove a tractor. She shot pistols. She did. It just was did way different. And mind you, they were from Mexico.
Mhm.
You know, so not, you know, it's funny you should say that. Oh, you're considered like girlish or womanly or
Mhm.
whatever, when that's you know, that's not the case.
Yeah, well,
Um,
that's something interesting too, and like a specific aspect of Chicana feminism back in the day. Now it's a little bit different because everyone has to kind of work, but
right.
Mexican American women have been working alongside men for a long time, right?
That is true.
Whether it be in the fields, whether it be like on the ranch, or even in their own kind of way, in like the domestic sector, right? So I
Right.
know Grandma Nena, she worked as much as for as long
That
as I could remember in the
my
hotel.
yeah, my poor mom worked since she was able to, since she okay, so backstory. My mom was born in Donna, Texas, but she was raised in Mexico till she was about maybe 13, 14. You know, her and her sister were born in Donna.
Mhm,
And when they were old enough, they got sent to the United States with cousins,
mhm,
and they were the babysitters. They worked at their restaurant. They,
mhm,
you know, my mom has been working since she was very, very small. Not
mhm,
only did she raise all her brothers and sisters, because remember, my grandmother was out in the fields. She wasn't at home to raise these kids. She had 10
mhm,
kids. She
mhm,
wasn't at home to raise these kids. You know, every year she had a baby, and every year there's my mother taking care of these kids.
mhm.
So when it was time for my mother to work and provide for their family back home, she got sent to Texas.
Yeah.
And you know, she worked at Hager's manufacturing
Mhm,
plant.
mhm,
She worked very, very hard. And then again, she was in the hospitality business. She was a housekeeper for a
mhm,
while, you know.
mhm,
But yeah, no, she worked very, very hard, very hard.
mhm. That actually, so kind of brings me up to my next painting. But before we
Okay.
go, I just wanted to kind of one final thought on this picture. So the hand on the chest, right, is I promise to be loving and nurturing and self-sacrificing, all that, right? The
Right.
fingers crossed is, but only when I want. So,
Oh, wow.
and I mean it that like again, these should be choices for men, right? Like it shouldn't be something that's forced on you or something that you have to do because someone said, or like the same thing for the men too, right? It shouldn't be like, oh, you're stoic or you're unemotional because we said so, or because if you do this, then you're a girl. Same thing for the women, right? Like you got to be this perfect mom, this perfect wife. You got to, you know,
Mm.
work. And then when you get home, have dinner ready and then cook and clean and take care of the babies, right? So this is kind of, at least for me, right? When I made this, this was like, I'm gonna promise to be all like this, and I'm gonna promise to be the best that I can be, but again, only when I want. And so that's why she has her fingers crossed. Um, so that's just something. We can go back to it a little bit later. But you were talking, and I really appreciated, Mom. You were talking about grandma and great grandma, and like kind of how hard they worked, right? So, oh,
Uh-oh. You lost signal.
okay,
Okay.
you there? Ooh.
And I can see you. I'm back.
Oh, okay, cool. So the next part is lesson from our elders, right? And so again, this isn't really like any particular person. She's kind of modeled a little bit after Grandma Amelia and then a little bit after Abuela. And then for those of you watching at home, like this is all like our family's kind of matriarchal. Like we grew up around women, like raised by women. Uh, there weren't a lot of men or influences from
Right.
men. Um, and what we had was a little difficult. Um, but yeah, so again, this is the lessons that we have that are passed down from us, from our grandmas, our mothers. And I think, you know, before we kind of talk a little bit more about this piece, I think that as young women, at least in my generation, we kind of forget that, or we take for granted all of the progress we've made. So I know, you know, I was the first person in my family, on both sides to go to college. I ended up getting my master's degree. Um, but for a long time, you know, women weren't allowed in college. Mexican Americans weren't allowed in college, right? They, you know, they were segregated, right?
Right.
Um, my my father's mother, my gram, she actually went to a segregated school here in Corpus. Um, you know, we were segregated from the white Americans, the Anglos. Um, and so when I move through the world and when I go into like academic spaces, when I go to my job, right, I'm constantly reminded, at least almost on a daily basis, that I am here because of those before me, right? The opportunities that I've had, um, the risks I've been able to take, and the life I've been able to lead is only possible because of the sacrifices made by those before me, right? So, you know, mom, you know, you had a lot of opportunity, right? Um, and yet, well, not and yet, right? You still raised me, right? You still looked
Mm-hmm.
out for me. You still took
Right.
care of me. And not that you weren't capable of college, right? Because you're smart, you're incredibly smart. Um, but sometimes, sorry, I don't mean to make you cry. Um, but life happens, right? Life happens,
That's
and
right.
then things block us from doing what we want, you know? Yeah. So again, I am incredibly lucky to be where I'm at, to have had the opportunities that I've had. And it's only possible through the sacrifices of my elders and through, um, honestly, like the whole village that raised me, right?
Yeah. Yes.
Um, I mean, we're talking about our family being matriarchal, right? Grandma Nena took care of me, Grandma Amelia took care of me.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and the same with you, right? You had Grandma Nena and you had Grandma Amelia, and this is what I have now is only possible, because of y'all, you know? And the freedom I'm allowed is only possible because of y'all, because, you know, somewhere along the line, one of y'all had to pay a price. You know what I mean? One of y'all
Right.
bared the brunt of gendered expectations, of racial expectations. Um, and so for that, I'm incredibly thankful.
Yeah.
I don't know. That was just my spiel. You can say anything else after.
Well, no, we Grandma Amelia, she went through a lot. She she was a rebel. Uh so backstory on them. My grandma and grandpa, which are my dad's parents, I love my grandpa. He was my father figure too.
Mhm.
And but grandma used to tell me stories of how she wasn't allowed to drive, and she wasn't allowed to drive because she didn't have her driver's license. That's what my grandpa had told her. But she didn't have a driver's license because he didn't allow her to drive. So,
Mm-hmm.
so she, she learned how to, well, she really knew how to drive because again, she was in a rancho. She knew how to drive tractors, things like that, right? They did, they did work and stuff. So she kind of knew how to drive. Well, she took her driver's license and her test and she passed and she had a driver's license. But for a long time, my grandpa didn't let her drive until she showed up one day. Look, I have a driver's license. So he had no choice. He ate his words and had to let her drive
Mm-hmm.
because she now had a driver's license, because that was his thing. Well, you can't drive till you have a driver's license, but you're not
Mm-hmm.
allowed to drive. Does that make
Mm-hmm.
sense? No, not
No,
really,
it.
but
Oh yeah. Yeah.
yeah, no, but so, but she was a rebel. She didn't work. She was a rebel. She was an entrepreneur.
Mm-hmm.
She made her own money because remember, her grandma sold Avon, she sold this, she sold that. She wasn't allowed to work. She
Mm-hmm.
had to stay home and take care of my aunt and my dad. But
Mm-hmm.
in the meantime, she did all these things at home and made her own money. And she was very successful at it,
Mm-hmm.
you know? And she became very successful with her little business she had there. And she, she was a rebel. And my grandfather had never wanted her to do those things.
Mm-hmm.
He was the man. He needed to provide. She needed to stay home with the kids.
Mm-hmm.
And she did it. She did it on her own. She did all this stuff, and she sacrificed, and she was she taught me a lot of things.
Mm-hmm.
She taught me to never take no for an answer. you know
Mm-hmm.
and I tried my best to tell you girls the same,
Mm-hmm.
to always be the best that you can be,
Mm-hmm.
and never give up on yourself. And she just, she was something else.
I
And
so from what you're saying, right? And I mean, I think a lot of older women and even maybe younger women can kind of relate, especially with the driver's license. To know Grandma Nena. So, we have our great grandma, your grandma, and then your mom, my
right,
grandma, who she wasn't allowed to drive either. And she, you know, was met with the threat of violence learning to drive um,
right.
by grandpa. And, um, what's crazy about it too is that like we have these loving men in our lives, right? And yet they kind of react in a way that's violent when we stray from expectations,
Yeah,
um, which is crazy, right? But again, that's the way that was the expectation, right? That you were going to stay home, you weren't going to work. Um, and I'm sure, that might have happened with Grandma Nina herself, but she had to work.
she had to.
She had to, right? And so I
Right.
think um, had things not had happened in her life, right? If
Mhm.
things hadn't happened the way they were, I'm sure Grandpa Ray, your dad, would have expected her to stay at home the same and kind of be like Grandma Amelia. Um,
Yeah. And I
which is
think he was like that because my grandfather was like that.
mhm. Well, it gets passed down to
And
us.
right. But it's funny because of course, my grandfather and my dad never did anything, bad to me at all.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but, I remember my mom telling me, about the driving. She wasn't allowed to drive. So she was working. She saved up enough money to buy her own car. And
Mm-hmm.
she didn't know how to drive this car. And she learned how to drive this car that she bought.
Mm-hmm.
And she got her driver's license. And my dad's reaction was, well, who did you flirt with to get it? Or what kind of insinuating that she had an affair or something
Mm-hmm.
to get the driver's license, which it was totally off the wall for
Mm-hmm.
my dad to say something like that. And of course, I remember my mom telling me the story. And mind you, I never heard these stories until I was older.
Yeah.
My mom always kept things secret. I never knew any of these things until later, until I had kids of my own. She would tell me all these stories. I'm like, what, Mom, are you serious? And she'd tell me all these things. And she's just like, well, I just didn't want you to think bad of your father. Or
Mhm.
I didn't want you to, it's just something you shouldn't have known. It was none of your business. You were too young to know all those things, or
Mhm.
whatever the
Yeah.
case, right? And but yeah, dad was, I don't know, dad was sometimes mean to her like
Mhm.
that. Like, you know, but I don't know. I mean, they divorced when I was very young.
Mhm. Which in itself is crazy for the time period.
Right.
Uh you're not supposed to get divorced, right? Like you
No, you're supposed to suffer and make it work,
yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
And that was instilled in me by my
Mhm.
grandma,
Suffer and
Melia,
make it work.
suffer and make it work. That's right.
Even when
You
it's
only
not
get
working.
one time, right? You only get one marriage in this lifetime. You suffer and you make it work. And I think that was more like a culture thing.
Yeah.
And of course, that didn't happen, but and I just, yeah, that was tough,
Yeah.
suffer and make it work. And I
But
know sometimes there was times where my grandma wasn't happy, but she suffered and made it work.
yeah. But I think, what you're saying though too is that every little generation, right? There's a little bit more rebellion. Um,
Yes,
just a little bit
you're
more.
right.
Um,
Yes.
we kind of push it a little bit further and we keep pushing it a little bit further. Um, which I think is how we survive. And I definitely feel like I took a lot of cues from y'all as far as like the headstrong, like being terca. Um,
Yeah.
but even just stories too, right? So like what you're saying about Grandma Nina, like not really telling you everything that was happening while you were growing up. I know, at least for me, when I lived with her in high school, she told me a lot of stories, but more of like these are my lessons, like don't repeat what I did, or make sure you find like a nice partner, like you know what I mean? And like she
Right.
was always encouraging me um to do good in school. Um,
Hmm.
and for a lot of girls growing up, at least in our community, I don't think that's kind of stressed a lot. I think the expectation is, or maybe not the expectation, but it's kind of assumed that you'll graduate, right? Hopefully graduate and then you get married and have kids and then that's it. That's your life. Um,
I know back then it was like that, but I think for us, when I was in high school, for me, there was a lot of expectations to, okay, you graduated high school, now you're going to go to college.
mm,
But because I was a female, I
mhm.
wasn't allowed to go away to college. You know,
Yeah. Hmm.
I had to stay here. My dad was like, why do you, my thing was scholarship to Texas A&M College Station, Bryan.
Hmm.
Okay.
Hmm.
That's where I was going to go. And I had everything planned. I had a roommate. I got the packages in the mail. I got, okay, here's the dorm. And I remember being so excited and mom, my package came in the mail from my dorm. And this is right. And it said Aggies on it and it had the Aggie keys. And I was so excited. And I remember she was excited for me because she, yes, you're going to do this, right? I
Hmm.
had partial scholarships. I had this, I had saved money.
Hmm.
And my father was on board with paying for college. But the minute I said, I'm going away, I'm going to College Station.
Hmm.
No, there's going to be a Texas A&M here in Corpus first year. Why don't you do that? It's better.
Hmm.
No, I want to go away. I want to go away.
Hmm.
I'm going to go away. And he was very, no, you're not going to. And I would say, why? Is it because I'm a girl? And he's like, who's going to take care of you over there? And who's going to take care of you?
The assumption that you
What if
can't
you get
take care
into
of
trouble?
yourself, right?
Right. I was perfectly
That,
capable of taking care of myself.
but that
I
like a
was not
man
afraid
has
of
to
being
take
alone.
care of you.
Right. Right. A man has to take care of you. And I was perfectly capable of taking care of myself. I wasn't afraid of being alone,
Mm-hmm.
and I even said, well, the girl that's going to be my roommate, her, her parents, you work with her father, I'm in good hands with her,
Mm-hmm.
and everything's going to be okay. And no, 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 no. So I rebelled and I ran away and married your father, and
Honestly.
I totally went the opposite direction because
Mm-hmm.
I just rebelled and I said, okay, you don't want me to go, I'm going to go even farther. I'm moving to California.
Yeah.
So, I mean, but a lot of it was because I was a female. Had I been a boy, a man, he would have let me gone for sure.
Oh
Oh, for
yeah.
sure. He would have been like, oh, look at Mijo. He's in college, he's
Mm-hmm.
at Texas A&M College Station. But
Mm-hmm.
because I was a female, that was unheard of. No, you
Mm-hmm.
cannot go. You cannot go far away.
Yeah.
And I don't regret the decision because obviously I have you guys, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't regret it, but I just wish my father was a little bit more open to
Mm-hmm.
things, and I knew, and when you guys were coming up, and especially when you decided to go away, I'm not gonna lie, I was scared, right? But I knew that you had to go, and I knew you could take care of yourself regardless. I knew that you could take care of yourself, and I was very happy that you got to do what I couldn't do.
Yeah.
And I think that all these expectations on me for, you got
Mm-hmm.
to college, you got to go to college, but you can't go far away. You have to stay close. We
Mm-hmm.
have to watch you. You have to be protected,
You still got to be a good
and
girl, you know?
right. I got to be a good girl. I got to stay home, and I got
Mm-hmm.
to be protected, and if something happens to me, if something were to happen to my truck, who was going to go fix it, or who was going to go
Mm-hmm.
do all these things for me, and it's funny, my dad just didn't, like, he always wanted to protect me,
Yeah.
like keep me close and protect me, and he had to be there for me, and as an adult he was like that too a little bit, right?
Mm-hmm.
And my grandfather, his dad was different. My grandfather showed me how to do things to my truck, and showed me
Mm-hmm.
how to, talk to me about changing a tire, you
Mm-hmm.
know he was always very what to do, how to put air in the tires, things like
Mm-hmm.
that. He
Yeah.
wasn't, it was just different,
Yeah. Yeah.
but this whole college thing about being female and not being allowed to go away to school, that was just crazy. And now it, I don't even hear about that. It's different. It's so different, way different.
Well, I mean, you'd be surprised. Well, okay, first, I want to clarify that when you were like, oh, I got married to your dad, I wasn't going like, about getting married to him. It was more like you were young and you decided to.
Right.
That's
Yes.
why I went like, oh, but
Yeah.
not
No,
to
no, no,
offend.
no. I know. No. Yeah. I was very young, and
Yeah.
I was very
Um,
young, and like
but
you
as
said,
far
life happens.
but as far as what you're saying, like, it's different now. I wouldn't be so sure, you know, because I felt pressured, not necessarily from you, but sometimes from dad about moving and being away. And some of the girls I met at UT too, who were also from like first gen, and they were um, like Mexican American or Latina,
Hmm.
they kind of said the same thing, that their parents were really against them moving, especially their dad, that they wanted them to be taken care of, that they wanted them to stay close. And I even knew, so I got my scholarship. I even knew a girl who got the scholarship, right, which was a full ride, um, but stayed home. She stayed home and went to college, even though she could have gone anywhere with the scholarship. Um,
Hmm.
and it was because her family didn't want her to leave. And yet, that girl, and even some of the girls that I met at UT, their brothers were allowed to leave. So I think, it's changed a little bit, but I think that there's still kind of that, you're only allowed to leave if you're starting a family, well, if you're starting a family, then you can go. Um, if you're a
Yeah.
girl, right? And if you're a boy, you're kind of allowed to kind of explore things,
Yeah. Yeah, no,
Um,
you're right. It's different. It's different for women. It's different. It's very
yeah.
different. You
Not
know,
saying that, yeah, not saying that it hasn't gotten better, because it definitely has.
right.
But I do think that, at least on my end and for my generation, like there's still a little bit of pressure,
Mm-hmm.
you know.
Right.
So that leads us to expectations.
Mm-hmm.
Um, this is a self portrait. So I actually took a picture of myself. I took pictures of hands, and like I kind of superimposed it and drew it and stuff. But I guess I'll ask you first, and then maybe I'll give my feelings as to like why I drew it this way. But what do you think this might mean?
Well, I think you were going through a difficult time when you drew this. Um, I think the pressure of graduating with your bachelor's.
Mhm.
And I think that this version of you speaks to me as far as trying to please everybody with those expectations of you,
Mhm.
and try to, trying to be that person that we all expect you to be,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
and and just the pressure of that getting to you. That's what I see.
Yeah. And I mean, you're pretty much spot on, right? Like there's all these hands kind of grabbing at me from all different directions, right? My own hands and other people, right? I think there's a lot of different expectations, right? So there's expectations, at least for me, like as a first gen college student, being the oldest girl, um, which right? I'm the
Yeah.
oldest daughter of the
Yeah.
eldest daughter of the
Yeah.
eldest daughter, right? Because Grandma Nina was the oldest daughter, you were the oldest
So,
daughter, I was the
yeah.
oldest daughter.
Right.
And I think sometimes, like at least for the eldest daughters, there's the expectation of like taking care of your siblings, and um, not because your mom or your parents don't want to take care of them, but because again they're working and you just have to pick up the slack, um, you know. And so sometimes there's that expectation, um, and then I think there's also an expectation from in a gendered way too. I know, at least for me, I felt, oh, okay. Bobby said, this is an amazing conversation. I think so much of this has to do with us men feeling like our ego is threatened. Um, a little bit, right?
Yeah. No.
And
Yeah. He's right.
a little bit. I know,
Yeah.
I know that there's some men that I've been around before that get very threatened that I have a master's degree. And will tell me straight up, like, oh, you're nothing, right? Like you just be, oh, you know the story.
Yeah.
Just
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
think
Okay.
you're, yeah, you think you're big because you have a degree. Well, no, no worries, Bobby, no worries. You put accidentally sent too early. Um, but yeah, as far as gendered expectations go, I feel like you know, I feel like I was never good at being a girl. I know that sounds weird, but ever since I was little, I felt like I wasn't doing girlhood correctly. Um, no, I did. I really did. I felt like I loved books and I loved math and I loved, like, I wanted to make robots when I was little. And I don't think I ever saw like girl scientists, or like, if I'd see a cartoon, it wasn't like the girl wasn't really like the smart one, you know? And oh, hold up, Bobby. Bobby has his hand raised. Yeah, Bobby?
Hey, no, I'm sorry. So I accidentally sent that thing earlier, or too soon. No, I was just gonna say I think a lot of it has to do with us not feeling like our ego is threatened, or that could be the dynamic to where a lot of these things that y'all were talking about, it's just
Mhm.
something that popped up, right? But I guess my question, first off, thank you both for an amazing conversation. This is so great. Um, what can men do, whether it be like in a partnership, right? In a
Mhm.
relationship, what can
Right.
men do to be more supportive towards more of a balance? Also, what can men do in the community or in the family to make the women feel more supported, more like equals, more like they have their own space that they have absolute command of.
So, great question. And I mean, we can go ahead and start doing questions. Um,
I think listen to your daughters.
yeah, listen to your
Li-
daughters.
Listen
Listen
to
to
your
your
daughters.
wives.
Listen to
Listen
your
to your
wives.
mothers.
Just listen.
Yeah. Listen to us when we're talking to you.
I know. No, don't tune us
Um,
out.
but yeah, no, and I mean to go back to like the not feeling like a good girl, like doing girlhood correctly. Um, there was a lot of times where even my dad wanted like the daughter that liked princesses and um was kind of liking pink and stuff. And I remember it wasn't just him. And I mean even you too, mom. Like when I cut my hair, when I shaved my head, you didn't talk to me.
I
uh
was.
you were mad. You were
I was
mad
mad.
mad.
I was mad. Okay, so I didn't know what was going on, and I didn't know that you did it for a cause, right?
Yeah.
When I first saw you, I was mad because I absolutely love your hair. It's
Hmm.
the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. It's like you
Hmm.
have this head full of thick, black, beautiful, curly hair.
Hmm.
And, and to me, that was like, I had to learn that you were more than just hair. I had to kind of like, learn that, okay, she wants to do it. And then I learned that you did it for a cause. After that, I ate my own words. And I'm like, you know what?
Yeah.
She's a grown woman. She did it for a great cause. And if she does it again, that's her decision to do. And I had to learn, and it
Yeah.
was, it was a hard pill to swallow,
Hmm.
and I had to like, I fought with it and I fought with it. And I'm like, and I wanted to be like, why did you do that? But I stopped myself and I said, she's grown up, she's her own person. She wants to
Yeah.
do this. And if she wants to do it again, let her,
Yeah.
Eh, and you are a million times more than just hair. You are a person, you are a woman, you have your own thoughts, your own ideas.
Hmm.
And I have to respect that,
Yeah.
and if you want to do that, then do it, and yeah. And now you say, oh, I'm going to cut my hair. I kind of cringe a little bit, but it's your decision, only because no, not because I'm trying to define who you are or anything like that, but because I love your hair. It's beautiful. And I gotta just learn to shut up and be okay, she's gonna do it. And that's it.
I think, yeah, but like what you said though, that I'm a person, right? Like I'm more than just hair. And I think even moms, right? Like dads, moms, they kind of forget that, right? That
Yeah.
the girls are more than just decoration. And for what Bobby was saying, right? What can men do? Um, I have a great example of my husband, right? So people always freak out. They're like, "You're married to a man?" Like, yeah. Well, because I'm always talking about like feminism and women's rights, but as
Yeah.
men, like I kept my last name, right? I know not every woman, you know, some women want to get their husband's names, but uh,
And
some
that's
women don't
okay.
even want it yet, and some women don't want husbands. Some women want wives, right? Which is like, yeah, right. Marriage equality. Can't forget about our lesbian sisters, right? Like these are all different paths, right, that we can take. But as far as like men are concerned, right, like you know, mom, you've even asked me like when I want to cut my hair or if I want to do something to alter my appearance, you're like, oh, what's your husband gonna think? And I'm like, I don't care
Yeah.
what he thinks, right? Like,
Yeah.
but I mean, that's really what it is, right? It's not that I don't care what he thinks, but it's me, right? It's my body.
Right.
Same thing with the women in your lives, right? Like, you don't have to be necessarily like a husband to your wife, right? Like, dads sometimes think this way. Brothers sometimes are really protective of their sisters.
Right.
The men in our lives tend to kind of treat us as like this object, right?
Fragile,
That they,
delicate. Yeah.
yeah, that either you're delicate or that like they kind of like possess you, right? And they don't even mean to, right? Sometimes they don't mean to, but they're, you know, they kind of react in this way where they're kind of like, well, I'm in charge of you, or like, you know, you need to listen to what I say. um when it really is just what you were saying, mom, uh, that you just listen, right? You need to listen. um
Right.
and I think that's honestly the first step to any kind of healthy relationship, any healthy partnership, is listening. um
Hmm.
and not just in romantic relationships, but in familial relationships too. I think
Right.
our relationship has gotten a lot better once I learned to really listen to your perspective and to like, one, be like thankful, right? But two, to communicate with you in a way where we're not necessarily in this weird power relationship, but like equals, right? We're both adults and we bring different perspectives to the table, you know? Mario Zamora said that he's been a little bit over 3 months where he started paying mind to every aspect of my mom's, sister, and niece's life, and it's actually a good thing. He's still working. Oh, God is still working with me though. Yeah, that's awesome, Mario. Like that's, I mean, that's what we want, right? We want to just be listened um,
Right.
to validate the things we go through, you know?
Right.
Um, Bobby, do you still have a question? You have your hand raised.
Oh, your little sister says hi.
Oh, she does?
Yes.
Hi, Marcy.
My bad, I forgot to put it down.
Oh no, it's cool. It's cool. I I know it's 7 o'clock and the event started at 6. Do you want us to start like wrapping stuff up, or?
Yeah, it's up to you if you want to go through at least like a rundown of the ones that you were gonna pop up, and then kind of just like summarize those, wrap them up together and stuff if you want. It's up to you. Like it's a great conversation to listen to.
Okay, yeah, cool. So I mean,
I definitely think we need to do a part 2 to this episode, right?
maybe. Yeah, no, so I'll go through the other pieces, and then if anyone has questions or wants to share as well, we can definitely open that up. And again, you know, my little sister said hi. Part of why I'm so terca and headstrong and wanting, always striving, is for my little sister, right? Like I want her to grow up in a world where the daughter can do anything, right? Like you're not limited, and you
And
don't have to, huh?
she already thinks like that. I'm going to tell you a little story about her. I'm so proud of my Marzi. She she's so smart, and she doesn't let gender tell her that she can't do it. So we had gone to the speech therapist about a month ago, and they're doing flashcards, and they're talking about stuff. And there's one picture, and it's a picture of NASA and the moon or whatever. And they asked her, what do you think about that? And then she said, my math is going to get me to the moon one day. And I just like, and because she remembered a story that I told her about how she could do anything she wants. Doesn't matter the situation, or if she wants to be an astronaut, if she wants to go to the moon one day, she can do that. And we were talking about math. And I told her, I said, you know, math is what gets you to the stars. Math is what gets you to the moon. And it stayed in her head. And she told that to the therapist. And the therapist was like, wow. She was blown, like mind blown, like, wow, what, this little girl said that, and how does she know that? And then, you know, and we just conversated about that. But a lot of things that Marzi says, that there's no nothing's holding her back. Like, she doesn't see any obstacles at all. You know, she figures out a way and she just does it. And she's not like, oh, well, only boys can be astronauts, or only boys can be this. You know, I mean, she just, it, like, I don't even think she knows she's a girl sometimes, you know. It's funny, you know, she doesn't, she's just, she does things her way. And I never tell her, oh, you can't do that because girls don't do that. You know, she does jujitsu. And I know back then in my day, if I did any type of martial arts, that was like, girls don't do that. But this little girl, you know, she does jujitsu, she fights, she does this, and she's, it doesn't matter, you know, it does. So what? She's a girl, she can do it too, you know. But I just thought I would point that out, you know. And I see a lot of you in her, a lot, a lot. We, even Dave says that too. He's like, you know, a lot of you in her. And it's just, it's nice. It's nice to see that.
Awesome. Well, I'm gonna move on because
Okay, sorry.
no. I'm just gonna keep crying if I keep talking about this.
I know. Okay.
But it kind of, I mean, we've already covered this in our conversation, the breaking free aspect. Yeah. So again, this is another self-portrait, and just breaking free from those expectations, knowing that there is something more and there's something else, or not maybe more, but there's other options and there's other ways of being, you know, instead of just this like expectation that we have. And then the last one was identity, right? So these two kind of pieces kind of go together in that I'm breaking free, right, of those expectations, and I'm putting the pieces back. And so I'm creating my own identity, who I want to be. Yeah, and I mean, it's funny that you say Margie doesn't even know that she's a girl, because I mean that's kind of like, not that like we don't want them to know that like you're like, you know, that's a whole other thing, but
yeah,
it's good to me. That makes me smile because that means that she's being raised to be like a person first, right?
Yeah,
without
she's
that,
not
like,
defined by who she's, like, that's not her. She's not defined by that, you know. She just,
yeah. And I
she's
know,
just is, she's just her.
yeah. And I mean, it's hard one to grow, like, to raise a child like that, right? Because I mean, even me, like, there's lots of times when I was growing up where I'm like, oh, girls don't do this, and it would make me kind of pause or think about certain things where I would hesitate, you know. It was and it wasn't necessarily like y'all, right? Like, I mean, now with Marzi, at least, like, y'all are all raising her very explicitly, like, anti, like, sexist, anti, like, you know, you guys, like, you're a girl, you can do whatever you want, right? With me, I was kind of allowed to do my own thing. And there were some times where, like, I would be told, you know, from you and dad, like, oh no, like, girls don't do that, girls don't sit this way. But it wasn't like super harsh, right?
Yeah.
A lot of the time it felt like it was coming from other people, from those around me, you know?
Right.
And, you know, like I was saying, like, I think, at least with raising children, I think if you're not explicitly telling the girls and even the boys that, like, you can be more than this, or like, there's other ways of being, if you don't explicitly tell the kids that, your children that, other people will tell them what their role is. You know what I mean? Like, other people will be like, well,
right,
you're a girl, so you need to do this,
you're
or you're a
supposed to
boy,
do
so
this.
yeah.
Yeah, or you're expected to do this or act this way, or, you know,
yeah.
carry yourself this way, you
Yeah.
know. And I think going back to what Bobby said about what can men do to fix this, I think it starts from young age, you know. if you have a son, teach them to listen to their wives, or to their partners, or and respect, and to listen, just to listen to what, what their sisters are saying, listen to what their mothers are saying. I think if you, teach them this young, I think that I think it'll help, I think the big thing is just to listen to, validate my feelings,
Mhm. And your experiences too.
and my experiences. Right. Yeah.